Welcome to Elect Your Energy Future. The debate will follow the style of question time, but Dimbleby was otherwise engaged this evening. I think it was a Thursday evening, isn't it? It has been put together entirely by our PhD students working in the Centre for Doctoral Training and Durham Energy Institute from beginning to end. So we look forward to hearing a bit more from them towards the end. It will be in the style, as I said, of a question time style debate, and so we will have a period of questions followed by a little event which is produced by folk voting on which technologies they don't wish to have in terms of energy. A few more questions which come through the Twitter feed, and then I'll bring the debate to a close and do my best to summarise the discussion. So, allow me to introduce our 5 guests. They will each have 2 minutes to make a pitch, and I'll introduce their names first of all, and then come back and go through the 2-minute spell, if you will. So, we're delighted to welcome James Wharton MP Conservative. Further to my left, Jonathan Elmer with the Greens, Councillor Wendy Taylor from Liberal Democrats, Jonathan Arnott, an MEP with UKIP, and on my far left, Liam Carr for Labour. James, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to make your pitch. Off you go.
Right, thank you, John. So I think Liam is to my far left as well. I'm looking forward to a very interesting debate. I'm the MP for Stockton South, and I'm a backbench MP. I don't have a particular specialism in energy policy, but I recognise, as I think nearly everybody involved in politics today does, just how important an issue it is, both at the sort of broader national, international political level, but also for my constituents increasingly on a day-to-day basis. And one of the most fascinating challenges that we are going to have to address is how we take the 3 key aims, the 3 key things we need to achieve, balancing them against one another and against the political reality in which we exist. We need to deal with energy security, which is increasingly on the political agenda, and we only need to look to Eastern Europe today to see how important that is going forward. We of course need also to tackle climate change and carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, which is a very significant challenge, and some very tough targets have been set for that, which are going to be pretty testing to any government to meet. And we've got to control prices, because modern voters and consumers don't want to see significant price rises, particularly following a period where, because of the global recession that we've seen, wages and earnings have not been going up at the rate that they perhaps have been in the past. The Conservative Party approach has been to pursue an energy mix to try to tackle this. I assume this is something I will get the chance to explore in more detail later, but we've got to allow for some of the older technologies, which are dirtier but cheaper and more secure, to be phased out rather than ruled out. So that we can bring in the necessary new technologies as they develop and advance and become more affordable to tackle some of the other issues that exist. It's not something that can be done overnight. It is not something that is black or white. The real question, I think, for energy policy is what shade of grey you are on the scale.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan, may I bring you in to make the 2-minute pitch? Off you go.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Elmer. I'm the County Durham Green Party Communications Officer. The debate's entitled Our Energy Future, and I just want to make the point that our energy future is inseparable from our environmental and our economic future. Our future. Most importantly, the environment. We're going down a road at the moment whereby we're producing carbon emissions that it's predicted will have a serious consequences on our environment. And our environment sustains life, including our life. I've done so many presentations to school groups, and this is a school kid thing. All of the oxygen in the air we breathe comes from plants. So we're not separate, we're actually connected to the environment around us, fundamentally. Now, Greens believe that the assessment of risk associated with climate change should be based on the best evidence that science can provide, and that policy should be based on managing this risk. Science tells us that temperature rises above 2 degrees C could have serious consequences for our planet, and its ability to support human societies. But to confine global warming to no more than 2 degrees C requires some serious changes. It means actually that we need to leave all but 20% of the known fossil fuel reserves in the ground. The Climate Act, which I'm most impressed by from the previous Labour government, makes an obligation to reduce CO2 emissions by 80% of the 1990 levels. And that's what we need to do in order to achieve this, well, minimise the temperature rise to 2 degrees C. Just want to engage in a little bit of myth busting as well. 100% of our energy needs, including baseload, can be provided by renewable technology. This is evidenced by international research by Stanford's Mark Jacobson, the European Renewable Energy Council, and a national case study conducted by the Centre for Alternative Technology. So bear in mind that myth that's often perpetuated.
Jonathan, thank you.
Okay,
that's a good point on which to finish. If I might move on to you, Wendy Taylor, please, to give your 2 months. 2 months? You've done extremely well. We'll try for 2 minutes. Thank you.
One of the reasons I joined the Liberal Party as a teenager and became a member of the Liberal Democrats is because environmental concerns have always been at the top of our agenda, and we were environmentalists long before it became popular. So nearly 30 years ago, our 1987 manifesto stated that every aspect of policy would be examined for its effect on the environment, and we called for more research and development work on renewable energy and far more effort into energy efficiency. In 1998, we called for a national homes insulation programme to end fuel poverty and for renewable energy to meet 20% of UK electricity demand within 15 years. We've achieved quite a lot through the coalition government. Over 40 billion invested in new electricity infrastructure, more than doubling of investment in renewable energy, and we now have 15% of the UK's electricity produced from renewables. There's been massive investment in onshore and offshore wind, making the UK a world leader in offshore wind. And also we've invested in a number of projects for renewable energy, from onshore wind to solar, from waste to biomass. Renewable energy projects have been spread across the country, helping to ensure that the UK's future economy will be more balanced as well as green. And the 2013 Energy Act is creating the world's first low-energy electricity market. Our priority for the future is to deliver reliable, secure and cost-effective energy supplies while meeting climate change targets and cutting overall carbon emissions. So our 2015 manifesto will endorse the Liberal Democrat vision for a zero-carbon Britain by facilitating investment in low-carbon technologies, creating green jobs, freeing the country from dependence on fossil fuels and helping tackle climate change. We aim to halve total demand for energy by 2030. We would increase the role of low-energy carbon sources, though by 2050 all the UK's energy is met by sustainable energy, with an intermediate target of 50% by 2030, with continued investment in offshore wind and marine renewables. And we would decarbonise the power sector by developing a more diverse and competitive generation and supply market, providing support for new technologies through the Green Investment Bank. We'd ensure new homes are built to a nearly zero energy standards, promote district heating schemes, and work for a globally coordinated international response to climate change.
Wendy, I'm going to draw up the line with you there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, actually, the third Jonathan, since I'm also a Jonathan in this panel. Jonathan Arnott, please, away you go.
We are facing an energy crisis in the UK. Energy prices have risen so dramatically that up to 6 million people are now in fuel poverty. That's 3 times as many as in 2003. In winter, many of the most vulnerable people in our society have to choose between heating and eating. And things are set to get worse. Many of our conventional power stations are reaching the end of their working lives. We're over-reliant on Russian gas, and the situation in the Ukraine could lead to even that supply being cut. So what are the solutions? Well, firstly, we need to make better use of the energy that we have. For example, I always drive the most fuel-efficient car that I can. When I started driving, my car booked in at 35 miles to the gallon. The car that I drive now books in at 78.5. Embracing technology will help to cut the demand for energy. In the short term, we're sitting on massive shale gas resources, and extracting that is the only way that we're going to, in the short term, be able to bring affordable energy to the UK and end fuel poverty. And sadly, there is far too much scaremongering about this. In the medium term, we need to explore the virtually zero carbon option of nuclear. We need to build more nuclear plants. It is now safe, efficient and an ultra low carbon option. In the long term, we need to develop renewable energies to the point that they become affordable and competitive. Now, wind power at present is intermittent and it's costly. It's pointless until we've solved the storage problem. But I would argue that in particular, hydroelectric and solar power will have the potential eventually to become efficient without subsidy in the future.
Thank you. That was 1 second off. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Liam, can you better that? Can you land perfectly on time?
I don't know.
Off you go.
I'd just like to start by introducing myself. I'm Liam Carr. I'm the Labour parliamentary candidate for the Hexham constituency. And the biggest policy that we've announced on energy is that we're going to freeze gas and electricity prices until 2017 and reform our energy market. Now, energy bills have risen by over £300 since David Cameron took power. And if you talk to businesses and business people in our communities, they often say that energy is the biggest cost that they face. But our energy market is not working for working people. When the wholesale price of energy goes up, then our bills go up. But when the wholesale price comes down, those savings are never passed on to consumers. And we're going to stop these unfair price rises. And it's going to save a typical household around £120, and on average businesses will save around £1,800. And it's going to be one of the first pieces of legislation that the next Labour government passes, just after we repeal the bedroom tax and we get rid of the privatisation law, the NHS Act. And what we're also going to be doing is we're going to have to provide the policy certainty and support needed to really unlock the potential of clean energy. And we will set a 2030 decarbonisation target, and we'll give the Green Investment Bank more powers. And you can absolutely guarantee that Labour will not be appointing a climate change minister who doesn't believe in climate change. And what I'm involved in is education and skills, and there is a skills shortage, and you don't have to be in UKIP to be dismayed at the fact that we have to import nuclear scientists from France to come and build new nuclear power stations here in the UK. We need to address the skills shortage, and we need to do that by making vocational and technical education just as valid as coming to a prestigious university like this. And in Germany, who've done this, and I'm sure we'll get onto their
I don't think we can get to Germany.
we're not going to get to Germany. I'll get to Germany.
Going into a place,
I'm sure Jonathan will thank me for not going to Germany. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So thank you to all 5 speakers for making their introductions and pitch. We now move on to the main section of the debate, and I have a series of questions in front of me which have been lodged by the members of the audience. And so I'd like to start off by inviting Philip Newbold. Philip, you sent in a number of questions about energy conservation standards. Could you try and merge them into a single question to address the panel, and we'll then allow the panel about 10 minutes worth of answer time. Thank you.
Okay, I'll keep this as brief as possible.
Thank you.
My main issue about energy is we seem to be fixated on generating more of it rather than using less of it. In the built environment, we have very, very poor standards. In the UK, about 20 years behind the rest of Europe. We also have a de-skilled construction industry that generally struggles to meet high standards of energy conservation in new building. The government offers subsidies for renewables, but no incentive or assistance for energy conservation measures. I just built a low energy house, and I've had no help at all from the government to build it any better than building regulation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to invite, specifically, Jonathan Elmer, you mentioned cut in demand, so I'm going to invite you to make the first response to this particular question.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of what you say there that I agree with. I think carrot always works better than stick. You know, we push fuel prices higher and higher, and that doesn't lead to a cut in demand. So what we need to be doing is actually incentivising, supporting the development of business, supporting the development of technology, and at the same time you have situations where, for example, when somebody wishes to make home improvements, that's subject to VAT. And so there's so many things that we could and should be doing to help that we're not doing at the moment. And I really think that reduction in the long term is going to be the way to go, because sooner or later we will be in a position to make much more effective and efficient use of the energy that we have available. And we're not at this point at a stage where we can simply cut everything across to renewable energy in an affordable way. So absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Given, I guess, some of that was aimed at the coalition in power, I'm going to invite first of all James and then Wendy to come in with that.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question. Firstly, I think we need to address the idea that energy efficiency of domestic energy use isn't being taken seriously as an issue. I don't think that is true. Actually, our domestic energy use has fallen by getting on for 10% since the year 2000, and that's at a time when the population has gone up by about 10%, so there are very promising signs. But we need to recognise, of course, that's for a variety of reasons, including improved technology, which is not necessarily anything to do with the role of government, although government's played some role in terms of setting a framework. Most of the emphasis that governments previously and this one have focused on has been existing homeowners. That's quite right. It's been how do we take your existing housing stock and make it more efficient, and how do we support you in doing that. A previous approach was that of the last government, which was effectively to say through schemes like Warmfront, we will add money to everyone else's electricity bills to pay for some people's to be reduced. The problem there is self-evident for the current political debate about electricity bills. What this government has tried to do through the Green Deal is to say here is an incentive for you, where we effectively offset it against the bills in your property, a loan in effect, but that is tied to a property rather than you as an individual. So if you move, the benefits of the measures that you install stay with the property. I think fundamentally though, if we're going to review housing stock regulations and requirements, we are heading towards a period where that can be done. I think our housing regulations are probably about 15 years out of date, if not more, in terms of what can be done to green new housing stock that's being built without significant additional expenditure. It's something that's very difficult to review when you're in a housing recession, which we have been. We're entering a period where house building is going to be happening again in significant numbers, hopefully all being well, and I think that presents an opportunity.
Thank you, James. Wendy, would you pick up the debate, please?
Yes. I think there's a lot that can be done both at a national and a local level, and there has been a lot done in recent years to try and deal with this, but I totally agree with what you're saying. The best way of reducing energy prices is to reduce demand, and that's why we've had this commitment to halve demand by 2030. And the way the Liberal Democrats would plan to do that is by transforming the Green Deal to bring all homes up to ENERFIT standard by 2050. We would retrofit 1 million homes a year, and we'd provide free insulation for everybody in fuel poverty. And we'd encourage energy efficiency in commercial and public sector buildings by offering interest-free loans. When I was responsible for environment in Newcastle, we were very much supporting the Newcastle Warm Zone. And that shows what can be done on a local level, because we actually managed to assess 78,000 homes while I was responsible. We put in something like 46,000 energy efficiency measures, and by doing benefits advice at the same time, we took more people out of fuel poverty by getting them more income. Obviously, you're going to ask how this is going to be paid for, and I think we would go with what has been recommended by National Energy Action and say that the funds raised from the EU Emission Trading Scheme and from the carbon price floor, that money should go into energy efficiency, and that we shouldn't be taking the money from the poorest people in society through their energy bills, and I would like that to stop. And also any VAT raised from energy bills should also be recycled into energy efficiency.
Wendy, thank you. Liam, could you respond to some of the comments you've heard and the question?
Yeah, Philip makes a good point about the insulation values of the materials that we use, and that our housing stock isn't efficient, and therefore if we're going to replace our housing stock, which we do need to do, there's a housing shortage, Now we may as well do that with energy efficient homes, and therefore the people who then live in them homes will see the benefits of that. We do need to get a balance, because house builders are going to build homes and they want to do it as cheaply as possible. So you can see why we've got this situation, and that's where government, the role of government is to step in and is to legislate and make sure that new homes fit a decent standard. The Conservatives, James mentioned their warm front grant that was cut, and almost like it was a good thing. I do believe that people's energy, the people who have got enough to pay their energy bills, should be subsidising the most vulnerable in society. And those grants were given to people who had very low incomes, and then they could make efficiency savings in their boilers and in insulation. And I think cutting it was quite a cynical move, actually, by the Conservative Party. And as I mentioned, there is a housing shortage, and we welcome the jobs that go with the house building, and the even further jobs that would be provided by putting solar panels up and making these houses more efficient.
Thank you, Liam. I know James wants to come back on that, but before I allow him to do so, I'd like to invite Jonathan Elmer to make a comment.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm trying to address the question directly, Philip. Personally, I believe that the building regs are far too lax, and there's been many opportunities to tighten them up. Why on earth aren't those opportunities taken? In fact, the recently passed infrastructure bill further watered down the standards for household energy efficiency. So it's actually going in the other direction. Now, I agree, I'm also involved in construction of eco-homes as a profession, and nowadays you can build to a standard called a passive house standard, whereby virtually the entire house can be heated via the appliances within the house because it's so well insulated. Now this is possible to do, the technology exists. So you have to ask yourself the question, why isn't it done? Well, the reason is really quite simple. It's because every time the building regs are revised, there's a series of lobbyists pushing it in the wrong direction. So, as I say, the Green Party would try and ensure that it's pushed in the right direction if we were elected. Now, I want to also mention one of the economic benefits with regard to the importance of housing efficiency, because if you live in a very efficient house, you're saving an awful lot of money in terms of your fuel bills. And of course you've got that money to spend on other things. This is not rocket science. Actually, building a very well-insulated house is hugely beneficial for the homeowner, but not beneficial for the housing industry who want to maximise their margin on the sale of the properties. These are the forces coming to play that lobby government, that push things in a certain direction. Also, I'd like to just quickly mention the energy efficiency obligation, which the Conservatives do continually attack and reduce. This is the money that the energy providers are required to put aside to pay for the schemes like Warmfront that you mentioned. So it's going down and down and down. The help in terms of addressing our current stock is simply diminishing at the moment. I'd like it to see it going in the other direction, personally.
Thank you, Jonathan. James, there's quite a few points you'd probably like to come back on.
There are, but I will try and be brief. I think it's a good opportunity to break out of the initial motherhood and apple pie and saying nice things style of debate, which always is present at events like this as it begins. I just want to pick up on a couple of things that have been said and just challenge them a bit. Liam, your point about Warmfront, you said you like the scheme, that's great. And you said you're quite happy for people who are a bit wealthier to pay more so that people who are a bit less wealthy can have money off to help them with insulation. But I was a lawyer before I was elected, and I actually drafted, I was one of the team that drafted the last Warmfront contract, and I can tell you there was huge waste in that contract. But I could also point out the obvious challenge. If your main plank of policy is to freeze energy bills, you can't have, as another plank of policy, putting additional money on people's energy bills so that you can spend it on a scheme like Warmfront. Some of politics is about very difficult choices. And actually the whole problem with the energy market is there's three issues that I talked about right at the beginning of my introduction. We have to balance and choose and find what we want to do that's in the long-term interest of this country. Similarly with the Liberal Democrat comment of halving demand. Absolutely brilliant idea. I'd love to halve demand. I'd like to do as much as we can to drive efficiency, to drive down waste. But these things, particularly when they're driven by government, have unintended consequences. Two very good examples, one historic and one recent. One was the requirement that energy companies save a certain amount of carbon. They found that they could score points on the chart for doing that by sending people energy efficient bulbs, even if they didn't use them. And it was more cost efficient to send people boxes of energy efficient bulbs because it helped them hit their target than to actually do things that necessarily save energy. And one that's in the papers today, an EU one, Jonathan, that you might appreciate, is that the EU is going to ban high-powered vacuum cleaners because they use about £8 more electricity a year than the low-powered vacuum cleaners. And as one constituent pointed out to me, if you've tried to vacuum with a low-powered vacuum cleaner, you end up going over the same spot over and over again to do the job. So you've got it on for longer. So sometimes government doesn't always have the right approach to these things. It's easy to say, it sounds nice, but if you want a cold, hard, real policy, you've got to face up to tough decisions. And that's what government has to do. And Liam, that's what you'll have to do if you get into government at the next election, God forbid. And Wendy, that is what your parliamentary colleagues have to do day in, day out in coalition.
Well, you've scored a few points there. I'm going to move on to the next question, if I may. We've got quite a lot of questions to get through. You'll get your chance. You'll get your chance on other points, Liam, if you don't mind. So, may I turn to Norman Mayer? Norman, are you?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Well, I was number 6, but never mind. That's great.
Do you have your question to hand on turbines?
I have it here. In my mind,
Just one moment. Let's get a microphone to you, if we may.
in my mind, wind turbines are unsightly, very expensive to build and maintain, especially if they're offshore. Wind turbines, I don't believe, make electricity if the wind isn't blowing. And they need to be stopped if the wind blows too much. And they can't store any of the surplus not used when they are working. Water turbines, on the other hand, I believe are a little bit more efficient. And there's over 8,000 mills and mill runs in the UK which may or may not be suitable for water turbines. Cragside, which was the first hydro-powered, hydro-lit house in the country 150 years ago, has now got its hydropower working again. Carrying all that, 10 kilowatts the turbine is. Why can't we have more water turbines using water, which aren't as unsightly as some of the wind farms that we now have?
Thank you, Norman. Clearly, a number of you mentioned use of and development of renewable energy, none more so, not surprisingly perhaps, than Jonathan Elmer. Perhaps you could start the response to this.
Thanks, Norman. I'll try and hit your point head on, to be honest, but then I'm going to elaborate. First of all, I appreciate that lots of people in the country find wind turbines unsightly. Most people actually find the ones on land the most unsightly and actually have a preference for those offshore. But I have to say that wind as a method of renewable energy generation is a proven technology and now generates a significant proportion of our country's energy. It works. Now, there are many other forms of technology that are still in experimentation that we can't rely on for the same reason. Now, we have got to make major changes in the way we generate energy and do that very quickly. So, whilst I appreciate that there are consequences in terms of the unsightliness for lots of people, though I have to say lots of people like the look of wind turbines as well. Do you mind if I ask people to put their hands up if they like the look of wind turbines? So there's quite a few, if you see what I mean. It's probably about, the polls are 60% actually prefer the look of it. You never hear that because it's always the opposition's voice that you hear. Anyway,
there's a second point raised by Norman
yeah,
in regard to
the water side. I'm coming on to that, Chair. What we need in this country is a mix of renewable energy technologies. There's actually quite a few. So yes, water turbines. And they're particularly valuable in terms of local energy generation and in terms of community ownership of the technology. So you can start community energy companies based around water turbines, for example. Very valuable in hilly areas where you could get a good head of water. But we mustn't forget the other forms of tried and tested renewable energy technology that work. And I'm thinking in particular of things like geothermal. Now, geothermal is very valuable because it can provide a baseload energy provision. Now, there are, obviously, that's the big criticism of renewable energy, but there is geothermal. The estimates are, if it was properly exploited, could provide something like 50% of our energy needs. Just one form of energy technology. We've also got tidal, photovoltaic, and a wide range of others. They all need to be there, they all complement each other. Obviously, things wouldn't work so well if we just tried to exploit one form of renewable energy technology. But together, they can, as I said in my introduction, can provide 100% of our energy needs. The issue isn't that the technology isn't available, it's the fact that we need to invest in the infrastructure. So we need to go through a period of transition with regard to where we are now, dirty technologies, to one where we're 100% reliant on renewable technologies. That is possible, it just requires political will.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let's share. Wendy, I can bring you in on this. You emphasised to the record in recent years of development.
I mean, like Jonathan, I don't think it should be a question of either or. Water turbines would play a very important part, I would have thought. But I just want to tackle the question of wind, because I do feel that the Conservative Party's attitude to wind turbines is indefensible. It's one of the cheapest large-scale renewables that we have. Do everybody remember last Sunday? It was a rather windy day. A record was reached last Sunday. 22% of the UK's energy was produced by onshore and offshore wind turbines. And that is enough power for 15 million homes. So anyone who thinks that wind isn't working is completely wrong. Now, one of the problems actually is the grid. It's the grid that's behind, and particularly the grid between Scotland and England, which can't cope with transferring energy at the moment. But that's something that we can build on. And I think that we have to accept that production of wind energy is a much more predictable science than it used to be. We're very good at predicting the weather. And if we've got wind turbines all over the country, we know where it's going to be windy, we know where we can get the wind power from, and it's becoming a much more reliable science. And the predictions are that it will be cost competitive within the next 10 years or so. So we can't afford to not have wind power. We've talked about energy security before. If we replaced it with something else, it would be more expensive. We would have to rely more on gas from Russia. And we need the flexibility that's been mentioned earlier of all sorts of different types of renewables to make sure that we get the most benefit. So I think wind turbines really are an important part of our energy mix and have to continue to do so. And I think it's disgraceful that Eric Pickles has personally stepped in to stop the number of wind farms going ahead in this country.
Thank you. I'll move on to Jonathan Arnott, if I may, particularly given the overlap you had with energy security, with that which Wendy mentioned.
See, last Sunday wasn't a particularly hot day, it wasn't a particularly cold day, and the wind tends to blow the least on the hottest and coldest days of the year, which is the time when you need power the most. So one of the problems you're always going to have with wind is that it's not going to meet the requirements of the national grid at the times of peak demand. Now, I find it interesting that we've got a suggestion that the national grid isn't ready to keep up, but we plough on regardless with wind. Surely what you have to do is you have to get it to a point where it is competitive, where it doesn't require massive subsidy, and where you sort those problems before you start looking at wind power. Now, I do think that in the short term, yeah, the over-reliance on Russian gas is a problem, and we are sitting on massive shale gas deposits, which is a short-term option. And it's not the most environmentally friendly option. It's something that we need to be doing in the short term to deal with the energy crisis that we've got at the moment. But what we need to be doing long term is start to look at nuclear, something which is virtually a zero carbon option. And we need to be looking at developing those renewables to a point where they actually are affordable, competitive, and those problems have been solved. Now, I think we're closer in terms of water to doing that than we are in terms of wind. I think quite often we're trying desperately to meet these EU targets, and we're going for the quickest thing that we can find, which is put up a few wind turbines, but actually it's not solving the problems that we've got. And I mean, I know it might be a little bit of a cheap shot, but when you've got David Cameron's father-in-law, who's Sir Reginald Cheffington, who's making £1,000 a day from having wind turbines on his land, I just wonder sometimes whether what you're getting is actually a well thought out solution for the future, or whether actually we're just trying to meet targets and not thinking strategically for the long term.
Thank you. Liam, can you pick up the discussion, please?
Yeah, I do understand the point that people make, particularly here in the northeast. You if you drive around, you can't miss wind turbines, particularly in South Northumberland. You can see them from everywhere. And these are large-scale developments, 100-foot plus wind turbines. These are huge wind farms, and I do understand the public's concern about that. But there's wind turbines, and there's wind turbines. I helped a farmer with an application to put up a small wind turbine because his energy bills are so high, he can't afford to heat his sheds in the winter, so he's investing in a small-scale wind turbine, which you can see from approximately 3 houses, the wingtips. The rest you can't see. So for the Conservative to come out with a policy of no onshore wind whatsoever is not going to help farmer communities that just want one wind turbine. The other thing that both offshore and onshore wind brings is jobs. You've got NAREC up at Blythe, and there's plenty of engineers employed up there in renewable energies. And I think having a blanket policy saying we're not going to have this anywhere, I think has the potential to scare off investment.
Thank you. We'll finish, if we may, with you, James.
Thank you. I'm feeling a little besieged, but I've probably brought it on myself. A couple of points I want to pick up before I address your specific question, so if I might, which is this sort of the gas from Russia, not a major problem for us, big problem for Germany. I think coal from Russia is a bigger problem for us. We don't actually get much of our gas from Russia. Jonathan, yes, it was a cheap shot to suggest that because Sir Reginald Sheffield has got some wind turbines on his land, David Cameron is unfairly favouring wind turbines, whilst at the same time the Liberal Democrats and Labour are attacking the government for unfairly being against onshore wind turbines. I do feel a little bit between a rock and a hard place. The reality is that we have quite a lot of onshore wind. We've got quite a lot of planned onshore wind that is coming. It is quite expensive to subsidise. The idea of subsidies and the argument for them in renewables has always been they will allow technology to develop to the point at which it does not need to be subsidised because it will be sufficiently efficient to pay for itself and compete with other forms of energy generation. So one of the things that, yes, we're trying to do, given we've got a lot of onshore wind already, given we've got a lot already planned to come, that has planning permission that's to be built over the next few years, is take the limited amount of money there is and shift that subsidy into other areas that will benefit from more investment, particularly offshore wind, which at the moment is very much more expensive, but there is much greater scale to do it on a vast scale in proper power generation projects, which you can then more easily connect, of course, to the all-important grid, which is another topic I'm sure we'll come back to and needs significant investment. As for water, I don't believe there are any particular issues that prevent people from generating electricity using water turbines. I think they are a great way of doing it. They are, you're absolutely right, more attractive generally. And I think than wind turbines are. And I know we've had a show of hands. I won't ask for a show of hands of how many people can see a wind farm from their bedroom window, but it does tend to colour the perspectives of the individuals involved somewhat, in my experience. My only comment would be, I'm not an expert on water power generation, is that given that it's already possible, given that we can already connect it, if it was cost efficient, people are there and free to do it, the market will do it. If what you're saying is it needs additional subsidy, then that's something that has to be considered when we look at the overall energy mix. It's not a black or white issue, as I say, it's much more complicated than that, but there is a valid case to be made, and I think that it deserves to be heard.
Thank you very much, James. I'd like to move on to the next question now, if I may. It's one which may take us all the way through to the 10 to 8 cut-off point. Barbara Vest, are you... Thank you.
Barbara Vest, Director of Generation from Energy UK, the trade association that represents the energy industry. I'd like to ask the panellists of the energy trilemma, which do you rate the most important? Successfully delivering a low carbon future, security of energy supply, or affordability? This goes.
Thank you very much indeed, Barbara. This clearly is a very tough question. Wendy, I'm going to begin this debate with you.
Well, I don't actually think you can have a top priority because they're all interlinked. One leads to the other. If you have security of energy supply, you produce your own homegrown energy, it's going to be cheaper. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we try and produce as much of our own homegrown energy as possible, because it will eventually be cheaper. It will be obviously a low carbon future, because that's what renewables are, and we will be secure in the world. I mean, we don't want to be in the situation where, for example, we have to depend on liquefied natural gas coming from somewhere like Qatar. The way the political situation is at the moment, we simply can't afford to be dependent on foreign imports of that type. And so we have to do all three. We have to continue to expand our renewables. I still think that we can't put a cap on wind at the moment. Eventually we won't need the subsidies, but we haven't got to that point yet. There's a whole range of different renewables that we can introduce to make ourselves more secure, and in that way make energy more affordable for everybody.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer, would you like to pick up on the discussion?
I always think that questions like those, there's always going to be an answer that all three are as important as each other. But I think when you look at the next few years, the pressing issue for me is the one of affordability, that you have 6 million people today in the UK who are living in fuel poverty. And that is a major issue. When we talk about developing renewables, we've got to also think that globally, whatever we manage to cut in terms of carbon emissions in a year is going to be dwarfed by the increase in China or India in a single week. And I think in terms of that development, what we can do in the next year or 2 years or 3 years isn't going to be able to have a massive impact globally in terms of carbon emissions. So I think we're in a position where we have to look to the medium term in terms of delivering a low carbon economy, and that's something which can be done, but it won't work when we try to use the most short-term of measures. We need to be looking for a longer-term strategy in terms of that. So I think the short-term affordability is the pressing issue, certainly for the next couple of years. And energy security, I think, ties in with that, in the sense that if you develop affordable energy now, then it will also increase our own security. You only have to look at the figures that we have only become a net importer of energy really since about 2003, and it's been alarming how quickly that has moved, so that our import dependency now is running at almost 50%, and that has happened in such a short space of time. And I think that goes to the affordability as well, frankly.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan Elmer, I'll move to you in this regard, please.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with my Liberal Democrat, Wendy, on my left here, to be honest. You used the term trilemma, sort of infers the idea of a dilemma, but I don't think there is a dilemma. I think that these three areas can complement each other and ought to complement each other. First of all, with regard to low carbon future, well, we know that there's a necessity for that if we're going to ensure that there isn't this 2-degree temperature rise that I talked about previously. So we have to do what needs to be done to achieve that. There's no in or out or question of should we or shouldn't we on that one in my mind. It just needs to be done to secure the future for the planet and us. But security of energy supply obviously relates to the need to be energy independent, to generate energy in our own country, ideally. And I really do think that the best approach to achieving that is through renewables technology. Obviously, renewable energy doesn't run out, whilst everything else does, including shale gas and nuclear, ultimately. So these things, in my mind, are stopgap. They could be important with regard to transition, but in the end, we need to move to a 100% renewables future. And that's got to include things like local energy generation, communities having ownership over the mechanisms for generating energy through local companies, giving them that stake in the generation of their own energy. Once, of course, the infrastructure with regards to renewable energy has been developed, of course that would, in the short term, require investment. You've got the cheapest form of energy, because you don't actually then have to be reliant on resources being extracted or mined in order to make that technology work. It's just the initial upfront investment that needs to be covered. We've got to start thinking about using some of the natural capital in the planet, rather than considering it, as the oil companies do, as income to be used and spent to generate profits. We have to start thinking of that natural capital in the ground as the means of generating the capital to actually release us from the need to use that sort of energy generation in the future. We're not doing that at the moment, and because these things are all market-led, we're not providing the right sort of incentive to generate a renewable technology-dominated future. And that's where we need to be, I believe.
Okay, thank you. James?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question, which is the perfect invitation for a politician to fudge the answer by talking about how important all of them are. And I'm quite impressed so far that actually we've had some pretty clear answers from the panel. If I was forced to choose, it would be security, partly so that I've said something different, and partly because I think that there is little point in having cheap electricity if you haven't got electricity. And there is little point in having low carbon emissions if the lights have gone out. And I can tell you as somebody in politics that people will complain if you miss your carbon reduction target, and you will take a hit for it politically. And people will complain if their energy bills go up, and opposition politicians will try and take advantage of it. People will riot on the streets if the lights go out and the hospital monitors don't work and their computers don't work and their phones can't be charged. And it has to be an imperative for any government to secure energy supply above all else in order to keep the lights on, keep the economy in the country moving, and to be frank, to keep people alive. However, that does not mean it is security at all costs. It doesn't mean price doesn't matter. It doesn't mean emissions don't matter. All of these things do. They're all very important, which is at the crux of why it's a difficult question. But if you were to force me to choose, security would have to be, in this very uncertain and unstable world, the one that I would go for.
James, a very clear answer. Liam?
Well, thanks for that little scaremongering that the lights are going to go out. You have an astonishing lack of faith in the engineers and the energy providers that we have in this country. I don't believe that the lights are going out, and I think you suggest otherwise. It's simply scaremongering. You said that there would be three. There's three different things. The low carbon future depends, as I said at the start, on skills, and on places like this, churning out students that are going to have the skills to solve problems which we haven't even thought of yet. I think energy security is very important, particularly with the worrying global situation that we're facing in the Middle East and in Ukraine. So, but I find myself in the really horribly uncomfortable position of having to agree with Jonathan Arnott from UKIP and to say that affordability is the most pressing matter that we're facing at the minute. We have a cost of living crisis. People's energy bills are going up way faster than wages. So we do have to do something. We have to freeze energy prices while we fix this broken energy market.
Thank you, Liam. Wendy's asked if you may make a final comment.
I just wanted to deal with a myth that's been raised, that we can't do anything about climate change because other countries are producing emissions at a horrendous rate. And I'd just like to give you some figures that China has committed to investing 286 billion in renewables and 376 billion in energy efficiency. And that's actually bigger than the economy of Finland and the United Arab Emirates. So China is taking this seriously, so should we.
Thank you. On that point, before we leave this question, I would really like to get some feedback. If we can take the microphone back to Barbara Vest and get your comment on this.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. Very interesting debate. You can see from the range of answers there that there probably isn't one answer. It is a trilemma, it's interdependent. The thing that I think we really need to begin though is an honest conversation about the journey that we need to go on and how much it's going to cost, and then the very good reasons why we have chosen to go on that journey. And it's that there's lots and lots and lots of factors that feed into that decision. What we also need is some stability and a really clear energy policy. We're bringing in electricity market reform at the moment. There are problems with it. We're trying to work hard with the government to ensure that we do get all right when we're supposed to. But we need to make sure that the story behind why we need electricity market reform is clear for the public to understand, because once the prices begin to appear and folk become more au fait with what we're trying to achieve, then we're going to get headlines. There's a run up to an election. It's just
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I have in front of me, it's now 10 to 8 or so, I have in front of me the voting which has been conducted from both yourselves and others who are listening online or outside as to which energy form is the least wanted. But I'm going to slightly drift off the agenda, so Andrew's heart rate will go up substantially now. Many of the people in this audience know a great deal about energy provision, power generation. I'm just going to ask a very simple question. If you put your hand up and I point to you, you get 10 seconds, no more. Do we have a silver bullet? Is there an energy form, a power generation scheme, or an approach that will meet these 3 criteria, or at least help us out? In the middle, fast mode.
Fusion. We just need more money to make it working.
White shirt.
No, which is why we need an energy mix. We need to balance the various factors of different energy supply.
Over on the right.
Nuclear. I think France have 50 nuclear power stations. We import electricity from France. It clearly works.
Towards the front.
Energy efficiency, because space heating accounts for 50% of your emissions. So, and type out in the electric, you can get that resolved through passive house and that.
And the gentleman in the middle, you've been working hard to get that hand into place.
No, because it's not just about generation, it's reducing demand and also this infrastructure there that's in place now from when all the coal power stations were built in the 70s.
One last one. Anyone? Gentleman over there.
Fast breeder reactors have been totally ignored. There's more nuclear fuel at big scale that could be processed in fast breeders than there is oil reserves in the Middle East.
Thank you.
That's all forgotten lost.
So, some interesting one-liners there from the audience, which I think nicely balances or contrasts with some of the discussion we've had around the table. So, I have what people don't want here, and I do wonder, given that we're sitting in Durham, that the thing that most people don't want appears to be coal, followed by shale gas fracking. Both those polled really quite highly. In the mid-range was wind, more or less the same as conventional oil and gas. Fewer people didn't want nuclear fission, and just a couple of people thought we should do away with carbon capture and storage or biomass. So I'm not sure where that takes us. Clearly, are there any retired miners in the audience? We have one retired miner in the audience. I guess we're a generation away from when coal was really important here. Okay, thank you. I understand now that I resurrect the debate with a number of questions which have come in through the Twitter stream, but I haven't been handed those questions. Can I read them? They're all done by hand. Okay. Right. I will shuffle them. There isn't really a fair way to do this. Okay. So, received on Twitter a question from Liam Herringshaw. With the North Sea reserves declining, if fracking is a no-go, where will we source our gas? And I think I'll start with Jonathan Elmer here.
Well, the question sort of assumes the need.
I knew you'd say that, yes.
So I don't really need to answer you all know what I'm going to say, I guess. The technologies that we currently use to I suppose, generate energy in our country need to be seen as transitional. Okay, that's as simple as that. We need to move to a fully renewable future. So hopefully, as the next 10, 20, 30 years go by, there will be a declining need to import gas in the first place. Of course, we are still extracting gas from the North Sea. Those reserves aren't completely depleted, and again, the infrastructure bill has made it a requirement to fully make use of those reserves. So there's more there. I would, well, I don't know the precise figures, but I would guess there's sufficient to take us through the necessary transition, coupled with other traditional forms of energy generation.
Thank you. Liam, can you pick up the conversation on where we get our gas from?
Yeah, just on fracking, that it's a no-go. It's very difficult, but I don't think that what Jonathan said at the start, that it's the only answer to our short-term needs is quite correct. We've got to look at it carefully. We need research. We need people like people in this place to do some research into fracking and really find out what the possible pitfalls of that doing, not in the US, but here in the UK. It does need to be a regulated industry, and I don't think we need to see a dash for this shale gas, but I do think it properly regulated and done properly, and if it's safe and it's safe for water supplies, then it can be done. But I think it has to be part of a wider picture. I think I'm going to delay the North Sea oil question until after next month's referendum. I hope that we all stay together. But I don't think we can really answer the question until after that. It is an industry that employs many people, and long it may continue, but it is running out. I think we have to look at smaller pockets that are just closer to offshore. So there's new technologies coming out where you can drill down onshore and then turn and then go offshore and look for much smaller pockets. So I think we're going to have to be exploiting reserves that wouldn't normally be explored, as long as it can be done in a safe way.
Thank you. Wendy, can I bring this question to you, please?
Sure. Well, we are massively dependent on gas. Twice as much energy flows through the gas grid as the electricity grid, and we're going to be dependent on gas for a very long time. So I don't think we can ignore the possibility of shale gas. But we have to be extremely cautious. And it's not, as Jonathan claims, a short-term solution. It's going to be another decade before we get significant amounts of shale gas out of the ground, even if it does go ahead. And it's not as easy as in the US. It's deeper, it's more difficult to extract, it's a smaller country. And we should look at the example of Poland, that was really keen to get shale gas as a way of dealing with their carbon emissions, and actually had to rein back because they found it too difficult. But whilst we're being cautious, I do think we have to look at the potential, and we have to be very careful about the impact on the environment, about water pollution, about seismic activity and the greenhouse gas emissions. But there has been an independent study done by the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering, who've shown that with proper controls these issues can be dealt with. That we need to avoid obviously areas of outstanding natural beauty. These are not particularly attractive developments, but there will be areas in the country where it's certainly worth looking at, and we should slowly move ahead and see what the potential is, simply because we are facing the possibility of having to import half our gas from elsewhere by the end of this decade, and that's not really a very good proposition.
Thank you. James.
Thank you. Gas is an incredibly important part of our energy mix. It, of course, it emits about 40% less in terms of greenhouse gases than coal, and that is a big positive, particularly when we're trying to reduce our emissions as an interim, whilst we find other ways of dealing with our long-term energy challenges. I don't think fracking is a no-go. I also don't think it's a panacea. It's not going to produce a short-term burst of high quantities of gas. It will take about a decade, I think, Wendy, as you said, to get it really going. Even then, it's quite erratic in the volumes that it produces. So what will happen if the North Sea gas runs out? And I say if, because although, of course, it eventually will, our history and experience in the North Sea shows that every time we get to or near a prediction of it starting to run short, we find more imaginative ways of getting more out. And there's some great companies here in the northeast that are doing that right now. But one day it will, and if we're not fracking, and if we haven't moved to a non-gas alternative, whether it is nuclear or wind turbines or whatever it might be, there are two things that might happen. One is we might import it, or more of it, from places like Norway. And the other, ironically, may well be if we have turned away fracking, that we import it by ship quite expensively from America, where they will get it from fracking.
Thank you. And Jonathan.
Well, I suppose the question makes two assumptions really. The other assumption was that we wouldn't be using fracking. I find it surprising because Witch Farm in Durham, for example, has been fracking for decades. It doesn't cause problems with the local community. We don't have the nonsense scaremongering, when you hear complaints about taps with being set light to and all that nonsense. I mean, the reason that that is utter nonsense in the UK, of course, is that we are talking about much deeper fracking, not shallow. It's well below the water table. No chance of it interfering with the water table, and in any event, our tap water comes from reservoirs anyway. We don't, like in some states of America, need to go straight to the water table to get our water supply into taps. So you get an awful lot of scaremongering about this. I don't believe that it would take a decade to get that up and running. I think in terms of the technology that exists to get to first gas within roughly 18 months, the issue really is in terms of the planning and the regulations and what the country's view is on it. So, you know, we are sitting on a massive reserve of something that the industry wants to extract it because it is profitable for them to do so. And what the country then needs to do is say, how do we make sure that's done in an environmentally efficient way?
Liam, I did notice your eagerness to...
I'm just really surprised because normally UKIP take a pretty populist stance, but we're coming out of fracking. This has caused earthquakes in Lancashire, and I'm just dismayed at your stance that you're going all out for fracking. I do think it needs legislation and it needs to be passed.
It's clearly an emotive subject, and I knew it would be when we picked up this question. Jonathan Elmer, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment to make. It's simply not fair to say that there are no observed environmental consequences or dangers associated with shale gas extraction. This has been widely studied across the States and Australia. And I would say also that it's probably fair to say that the local environmental consequences of fracking have been overblown, coming from a Green Party person. But I would also say that the international environmental consequences of bringing a whole new form of carbon fuel online have probably not been discussed enough. So what this is actually doing, what we're saying here is that as gas and oil and other coal and other more traditional carbon fossil fuels are running out, we're going to bring online a whole bunch of new forms of fossil fuel related energy. So that includes coal gasification as well. Now, we're kind of scraping at the barrel here. What we need to do is try and decouple our economic dependency on fossil fuel based reserves. And bringing a whole new one online is not going to help that. It's actually locking in the fossil fuel based economy, when we actually need to be trying to develop a very new sort of energy based economy. Sorry.
Jonathan, I saw you desperately.
I mean, it's something that should be done over 5 to 10 years. I don't accept the earthquake in Lancashire argument. Slightly surprised to hear that one. And of course, we've got to remember that the difference between America and the UK is that we're talking about deep fracking in the UK, which is not the case in America. And so a lot of the issues that have been observed in America are completely different from what would be in the UK.
I'll draw that one to a close. I could, given my background, make some comments, but I will not do so. Okay. We'll have over a glass of wine or something in a few minutes. And one of the questions which is coming from, I think, the audience rather than Twitter, reignites a slightly different take on a question we had earlier on, but I think it's a valuable approach. So, Mark Lewis, would you like me to read your question out, or would you like to do it yourself?
You can do it, Mike. I think it simply was, how are we going to encourage people to save energy? I think that is a way of getting gains in carbon emissions at no cost.
So how can we do it? We've looked at the practicalities, but how do we persuade the public? You were very quick off the mark then, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Well, I spent a lot of my time trying to persuade people to do this, trying to come up with good reasons for it. But clearly the most powerful reason is to help people out in terms of their spending, the money that they've got available to them. So if you're going to try and lock in a renewable technology, householders, people who live in this country have to directly feel the benefits of that, personally. Most people, I've just got rid of the car and I now have an electric bike. Now I go to meetings, do all my business in the city of Durham. It actually gets me to be faster, and it was a bit of an initial capital outlay, but I save a huge amount of money through not having to have a car. So there are big personal financial benefits as well as environmental benefits, and it's not all about moral crusading with regards to the importance of the environment. And you can say the same, obviously, for household energy efficiency, which ideally should reduce people's bills. So the system has to be created in such a way that it does enable people to save money if they're going to implement, maybe make a bit of an initial outlay on these technologies.
Okay, thank you. James?
Yeah, I think you may regret ditching your car, which you cycled home in the rain this evening. We've got a number of things that we need to do, many of which we're already doing, but which do not necessarily work as well as we would like them to. We need to perhaps look at different ways to enhance the broad policy thrusts that already exist. We've got to inform people. People need to know why, what the benefit is, why should they take an interest. That's harder, easier said than done. It's actually quite hard to get that message across. And I think one of the key things that will help with that will be the introduction and rollout of smart meters. Now, I'm not 100% sold on every aspect of how it's being done, but I am sold on the idea of giving people more information about the electricity they use, and therefore enabling them to see the effect that saving electricity has. And I know a number of people who've got these smart meters type devices already ahead of sort of proper rollout from their energy suppliers. You can get them online or buy them or whatever. And they run around the house switching out the light switches because they like to see the little ticker do less. And that's just giving people information, a simple thing that affects behaviour. But we also then, once we've persuaded people, once we've given people the information so they see the value in doing it, have to assist people in the process. And that's where things like the Green Deal come in, where you get support for the cost for something that ultimately will save you money, but where the capital risk might put you off, the inability to access capital funds might prevent you. We need to get the support mechanism right, the information mechanism, information flow to people right. If we can do that, persuade people, that's ultimately what will make the difference, rather than, I think, some of the top-down things we see, going right back, for example, to the powerful vacuum cleaner example from earlier, which can have unintended consequences.
Indeed. Jonathan Arnott, would you pick up the discussion, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to look at things for a workplace level as well, because there are a lot of journeys which can be reduced. There's so much more that can be done these days. Now that we've got the internet, now that we've got the ability for people to hold meetings, for example, over Skype, and actually reducing the number of journeys in the first place, that kind of thing is something that's very easy to encourage and quite often will be in the best interests of business anyway. I think quite often the public will be motivated by a financial saving, and a lot of that, in my view, can be done in terms of the taxation system. Again, I mean, it's not the most, it's not the biggest incentive to buy a fuel-efficient car that the road tax is that much less, but it helps. And I just wonder whether there's something there that in terms of other appliances, whether something can be done through the tax system to make it easier for people to purchase more efficient appliances. I think we also need to think that we're not just talking about on a domestic level either, and we need to be making sure that we ensure that industry, which is actually using an awful lot of the power consumption in this country, and trying to make sure that industry is much more energy efficient as well.
Liam, if I turn to you, please.
Yeah. I think we need to look at transport as being touched on. This week, rail price increases were announced, and we're seeing season ticket fares now, just stupid money to get from Hexham into Newcastle. It now costs over £1,200. And that isn't encouraging people out of their cars at all. And also we see, before that £1,200, you've got to sit on a diesel train from old rolling stock that's being used elsewhere. And for a fraction of the investment we're seeing in Crossrail in London, we really could see a lot of public transport infrastructure investment, which we're not seeing here in the North East. We can encourage people to save energy, and it's not by doing what this government's been doing, is trying to let the market do it, because what we've seen is that energy prices have gone up, but people still need to use the energy they've got to use. So I don't think we can keep on putting prices up and expect that to work. We've got to really invest in really technologies and development and research that are going to save people money in the long run, and to make new technologies cheaper, like the mass production Leaf car that's coming out at Nissan, and just make things cheaper for people so they can save themselves money and also benefit the economy and the environment.
Wendy, I'll finish with you.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's very difficult to get people to take this seriously and take action. And I think there's a number of levels where you can do that. And the most important, I think, is in schools, where we teach children about climate change. What we've done in Newcastle is to put biomass boilers into some of our schools. We've got solar panels. The children can be told about what these are doing. They can actually take an active part. And pester power is extremely good from children. They'll come home and they'll tell their parents what they've learnt at school, and it perhaps encourage them to look at their energy supply, give them a smart meter, tell them to take it home and see what difference it makes. So I think schools are a very important starting point. Local government is also extremely important. I don't know how many of you have had calls from cold calls saying, we'd like to tell you about a government scheme, by which time I put the phone down. Whereas if you actually have a council officer from your local housing society or your, either where we've still got council housing or where there's an arm's length company, if one of those officers actually goes round with somebody who is offering energy schemes, there's a lot of confidence in the council. People do actually trust the council still, maybe not the councillors, but the council. We actually find that that's a much more effective way of getting people to take up the measures that are being offered. As regards products, there's a scheme working at the moment with John Lewis where the actual lifetime energy cost of an appliance is being put next to the price, and that's something I think we should spread to all appliances and preferably cars as well, so that people can know that yes, they might have to spend a little bit more, but the lifetime cost of using that product will be a lot less. In workplaces, we've tried in the council to introduce energy champions. People will go around and try and encourage their colleagues. You can actually have competitions and give prizes to the team that managed to reduce their energy most. So there's lots of different ways you can do it, and a lot of them have been tried, but it is a very difficult thing to actually get people to change their habits.
Wendy, given you're on the front line, as it were, in this regard, can you report back on any successes you've had?
Well, I mean, we had a green school programme that was funded by NPower for a number of years. That involved 20 schools. We have had this Energy Champion scheme. We've put in a lot of measures into council buildings and looked at the benefits of those. So the valve insulation product saved a huge amount of money. So there's been lots of little things that we've tried. Not all of them have worked, but I think local councils are at the forefront of trying to encourage communities and individuals to take this on. And just one other thing, on the Green Deal, Birmingham City Council, through their City Deal, have actually made this a council project or city project, and going street by street to actually sell the benefits of the Green Deal to local communities. And I think that is the sort of way that you get progress.
Thank you. Another question, which I think might have come from the audience rather than through the Twitter stream, is from Andrew Compton at Alston. Andrew, are you in the audience? Andrew, would you like to ask your question, or shall I? The microphone's coming over.
Given the hundreds of billions of pounds that will be needed to be invested in our energy system in the coming decade or two, what can the government do to improve the level of investor confidence that is so lacking currently?
Okay, given it's directed at government at the moment, I think we'll probably ought to invite, we'll start with Wendy and then move to James.
I think that's a very important question. If we're going to get investment in renewables, the people investing have to have confidence that their investment isn't going to be completely wasted when a new government comes in a few years' time. So it does help to try and have some sort of political consensus, however difficult that is, that what's been introduced will be supported for the foreseeable future. That's absolutely crucial. The government has done a lot, I think, to help with investor confidence. There's the money I mentioned earlier that's been put into renewable projects across the country, so offshore wind farms, biomass, etc., with the knowledge that that money will be available and that the contracts are there. The contract for difference can also bring in other people, I think, to start getting support for their schemes. But we have to have this stability, because that's the most important thing for investment in this country. We've become a world leader in offshore wind. We have to maintain that. We can be a world leader in many other renewable technologies. We've got wind, we've got tide, we've got wave. We can be a world leader, but we have to allow the companies to develop and know that their investment won't be wasted.
James.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really crucial question, and it's one to which I don't know the easy answer. Because the challenge is not just the governments, it's about our entire political process and the debate that surrounds energy. We've seen in some of the differences of opinion expressed in the debate tonight, both from the audience but also from the panel, how great this challenge is. Because when we're asking people to make very significant investments, they need to know that in a few years' time, something isn't going to change, political wind isn't going to change direction, and their investment becomes worth much less than they thought it was going to be. And there are two ways you deal with that. You have a sensible, grown-up debate. You find a consensus about the future of energy, and the main political parties agree not to take populist stances on what is a crucial issue. That's probably unlikely, I'm afraid, particularly in the 8-9 months as we run up towards general election. The other thing you do, which is much less appealing, but is a tried and tested method that has been deployed by governments, is you start signing long-term contracts that have got very, very painful penalty clauses in them were you to try to unwind them. We saw that in a number of the things that this government inherited across a number of areas of policy, particularly in defence that I took an interest in. Some of the kit that we promised to buy was more expensive not to buy than to go ahead and get, even though we didn't want it or need it or have the money for it. And actually this government is now signing contracts, for example, with EDF for nuclear, which are going to last into the medium if not long term, and will provide certainty to that individual company. So in the ideal world, we'll have a proper debate. We'll actually take some tough decisions, which not everyone will be happy with, but we will at least be serious about it and offer stability, because we've got real something that approaches consensus about the future of our energy policy. Unfortunately, that is less realistic. The alternative is to start making real decisions. What's really going to happen? I suspect we're going to do what we can to buy time. There will be examples of serious decisions being taken, but no one's yet concluded what the ultimate answer to our energy mix is. And so people are going to buy time and fudge until the choice becomes one that we have no alternative but to take.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer?
A few points to make. I largely agree with a lot of what's been said. Stability with regards to government position is obviously crucial, but I also don't envisage that being something that's easy to negotiate. I just can't see the main political parties actually aligning around a common position on the future of energy. I have to say that at the beginning of the coalition's period in government, they did some things with regards to changes to feed-in tariffs, particularly in terms of photovoltaics, that were very destabilising to the industry and resulted directly in unpredictability with regards whether or not people would buy those products. Overnight, the profitability of those products changed dramatically because the payoff period, was set back a good few years. But I would also say that, EDF as an energy company was just mentioned. As I'm sure you all know, EDF is a state-owned company owned by the French, as far as I'm aware. It's not a private company. It's owned by the government. And that brings me on to the Green Party's policy position with regards to the future of energy in terms of its distribution. We support renationalisation of the distribution network for energy. Not with regards to the generation side of things. We prefer a sort of public-private mix of generation providers, but with regards to distribution, we support renationalisation. And there are many good reasons for that. And in particular, the government, because of its credit rating, is able to borrow more cheaply. And also, that in itself provides a degree of stability and predictability with regards how that network, how that system is going to be operated in the future.
Jonathan, investment.
I suppose, by analogy, when you look at the stock market, you see that where there is a global uncertainty, then market falls because of lack of confidence. And we're in a very much similar situation, aren't we? We have a massive uncertainty, and therefore we need a long-term plan. and that long-term plan needs to be stuck to. And I think it's interesting. I think that's the one thing where we all agree, probably on this table, that we need to have a long-term plan, that we need to stick to it, but perhaps none of us are actually going to agree what that long-term plan actually is. I think, you know, I've made clear, I've made clear what my view is for such a long-term plan, that you've got short-term shale gas, medium-term nuclear, long-term, that is the point at which we will be able to develop affordable renewables. I suppose, you know, different people are going to come up with different ideas. I do think that there isn't so much clarity from other members of the panel perhaps about exactly what their plans are.
Liam, are your plans clear?
Yeah, my plans are pretty clear. What we said is we're going to freeze energy prices for consumers at the very start of the Parliament. So that will provide a window where we can reform the energy market. And we're only going to do it once at the very start of the Parliament. But the question asked was about investment. And we do need policy certainty, but we have got democracy, and Winston Churchill said that it's the worst form of government apart from all the rest that have already been tried. They don't have this problem in China because they've got the same government all the time. So we do have to try and get around the table with people who we may not agree with, who may go on to form the next government, and I'll be doing everything I can to ensure that it's a Labour government that comes to power. But we do have to talk to people who we don't agree with, and we have to set some long-term goals. For example, we will set a 2030 decarbonisation target, which will give certainty and then provide the support and investment, and also give more powers to the Green Investment Bank. It's been set up, but not much is being done with, just to try and give investors in certainty that long term they will get a return on whatever investment they put in.
Thank you. Andrew, your question understandably has generated quite a bit of debate, and I know that both James and Wendy would like to come back. So James.
Yeah, thank you. I actually again want to pick up on a couple of the things that the discussion has thrown up. There is agreement for the long-term plan. Jonathan, just to challenge some of the issues that you raised, the photovoltaic feed-in tariffs, the way that those were cut quite dramatically and quite quickly by the government. I think it is fair to say that the speed with which it was done was not popular and caused some concern in the industry. However, at the same time, it is the right thing, and it's the whole underpinning idea of the policy, that when rollout is working, when the technology is getting cheaper, the subsidies are meant to come down. And if you bring the subsidies down, it means you can spend that money on something else. And so the government was right in what it did, although I recognise the frustration in some parts of the industry with the speed with which it did it. On EDF, it is, of course, a state-owned French company, which is effectively massively subsidised by France's sort of love affair with nuclear power. Now, nuclear power has merits and it has dismerits as well. The long-term cost of getting rid of the waste fuel from nuclear is actually in many cases yet to be properly quantified. In the British government's accounts, it's already over 50 billion is the estimated cost of getting rid of fuel that's already been spent. So it's hard to actually assess the cost of it. And on the idea of renationalising the grid, I was very interested either in how much that's going to cost and where that money's going to come from, or if you're going to seize it, and how that's going to tie in with remaining a member of the European Union, which generally doesn't like the seizure of assets by the state and is against the law. So there's lots of really complex issues. There are lots of things that people like to say, we'll renationalise this, but we don't know where the money's going to come from. We're going to freeze energy prices and cut carbon, but there's no more money to put into it. But if the energy companies don't want to supply at that fixed price, what are we going to do? There's no answer to that question. There are hugely complex issues, and there is a very important matter at stake. The challenge we've got is going to be having a serious debate and doing away with some of the shallower soundbite type politics that I'm afraid will dog the next 8 months at least of energy policy discussion.
James, thank you. Wendy.
Yes, I just wanted to come back on this question of freezing energy prices, because the people who will benefit from that are the big 6 energy companies. The people who will have greatest difficulty with it are the independent companies that are providing an increasing proportion of our energy at the moment. They will not be able to cope with a sudden rise in raw energy costs. They will go under, whereas the big companies will be able to absorb that cost. And almost certainly what will happen as a result is that before the Labour government can actually introduce this freeze, all the energy companies will put their prices up in preparation for that. So I don't think it's actually going to achieve what the Labour Party would like it to.
And Jonathan Elmer, would you like
just a very quick point. With regards to the position on subsidies, in this country we also subsidise nuclear and indeed shale gas extraction to a very great extent. I mean, the French subsidise EDF, as James rightly said, with regard to nuclear energy. In this country, nuclear energy is also subsidised to a great extent. This is just an ideological difference about where the subsidies should go, whether it should go to the private sector or state-owned industry. The subsidies go in either way.
Liam.
Yeah, it's nice to see the Lib Dem falling nicely behind their Tory colleague there. The people that will benefit from a price freeze are consumers, and particularly the most vulnerable consumers who are having to choose between heating and heating. And the Big Six didn't exactly welcome the announcement, so I don't think it's going to benefit them very much. And I just think it's typical from the Lib Dems to attack what seems to be a sensible policy which has been welcomed by the public.
Jonathan, I'll let you have a go, and then you've all had 2 turns, so I'll draw the line at that.
You know, I mean, it reminds me of the Gordon Brown sell-off of our gold all over again, where he announced that he was going to do it in advance, and having announced it, of course, it meant that he didn't get the amount of money for it that we should have got. And if you announce that you're going to freeze energy prices well in advance, then, of course, the moment that energy companies think there's going to be a Labour government, then it is absolutely guaranteed they're going to have a whopping great price increase before that to take it all into account, and then they'll have the freeze afterwards. It seems to me that it's just we're being sold some snake oil here, aren't we? We're being told that this is a cure-all to the energy price problem, but that's not what's going to happen. It's not going to actually benefit consumers. It's just some cheap electioneering right from the start, and you know, I'm absolutely convinced that people are not going to find their way out of fuel poverty as a result of that kind of state intervention.
Thank you. What I'd like to do here, this is clearly a very important question. Andrew Compton, when you asked the question, I don't think that you revealed who you work for, though you have said this on the question piece. You're with Alstom. You have a take on the approach that might be adopted here in terms of investment? Is there a microphone? So we'll take a view from the industrial world. If we
there are three points that I pick up on that were made. I agree with James that the political parties of all colours have been kicking the can down the road for a lot of years, and this is particularly true. If nuclear, we're going to have a gap now in between decommissioning and new build. I think this is around the complexity of the problem and the fact that difficult decisions are going to have to be made and people are reluctant to do that. So we have to get past that. I would say to Liam's point about the decarbonisation target, that is the sort of thing that would help. It at least sets the direction of travel for the industry. People know that that's what we're committed to in the longer term. And that sort of really helps to set the mood. Perhaps the last point I'd make is about the Jonathan on the far right there, in both senses of the term. Sorry, I thought you were self-identified.
Stage left.
In either sense.
But the point you made about this short-term, medium-term, long-term issue, saying that renewables will wait until they're nice and cheap, we'll just keep developing them and then we'll bring them in the longer term. My company's working on targeted technology now that won't yield a revenue stream until 2022, something of that nature. That's about the very limit that a company of our size, with a large multinational, can really tolerate. You know, we will not continue to plough money into developing renewables for which there's not a market for 20, 30 years. It's not that.
Thank you for that question. We have about 2 minutes of the debate left to go. In good question time style, I have a slightly light-hearted question which has come in for the final question. But just before we get there, this has been organised by the CDT PhD students here in Durham, working in energy. What do you have to say? Anyone? Chance to be organised. Not part of the deal. Not at all?
I think we should all go into politics until we
No. Okay.
I think I do have a serious point. I think you know, we are a mix of students, and I'll talk about this from a lot of different disciplines. And I think the best question is one from here, that it's going to be a mix. And it's going to be a mixed future of different sources and solutions. And I think that's probably where the answer is going to come.
And with the mix we have here, you will inherit the future and deliver it, I guess. Okay, we'll turn to the final question, which was sent in by Charlie Jefferson. And we know the answer to one of these questions, for one of these, I guess, already. What transport method did each of you use to get here today? James?
I drove, partly because it's a little bit further from Stockton than from living in Durham, and partly because I don't own an electric bicycle.
Okay. Jonathan? We know what you did. Jonathan, you're on the electric bicycle. Wendy?
I came by car, but considering it took me over an hour to get here, I really wish I'd come by train.
Jonathan again.
I think you already know I came here by car.
I came by car, but I did car share, so half the car.
Thank you. Let's make this absolutely fair to our audience. Who came by car? And bicycle? And who walked? Students. I knew that would score quite well. So, anybody come by pogo stick or no? Train? Train and walk, yes, very good indeed. Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand over for the vote of thanks to Andrew and Douglas, no? Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming along tonight. I'm going to obviously move on to saying thank you. I just want to first talk about us guys in these white t-shirts. As John said, we're a real mixed bag of different students. Day to day, apart from ANKIT, we're all scientists, and we all work on different aspects of the technologies we're talking about today. And these white t-shirts and the group we're part of is all about collaborating and contextualising our research. And it's been a really good opportunity tonight to sort of hear what you've said and what the politicians have had to say and what people on Twitter have had to say, and that helps us and that helps what we do. Looking forward, we've got some industry funding and we're always looking for people to collaborate and engage with. And that's not just money, that's people to speak to, people to come to presentations, people to visit. And if that's something you're interested in doing, come talk to ourselves. Oh, hello.
Really? We have a young energy professional forum. We need to join it.
We'll join that.
Yeah.
So if other people are interested, Simon in the purple t-shirt, if you just wave Simon, he's someone good to talk to. There's Douglas at the front who's blue shirt, grey hair, grey hair. That's not our fault. And any of us in the t-shirts, that'd be great. But yeah, so moving on to the thanks, obviously I'd like to start by thanking John. John's been a real help throughout this and really taken on the debate. The thing with John is he's one of the protagonists of fracking. Is that a fair statement? You certainly know a lot about fracking.
I wouldn't say I'm a protagonist, I know quite a lot about it.
Okay, yeah, so I can see you holding back there, that was great on that. That's real dedication, that. And obviously to the speakers, you've been absolutely brilliant and engaged with us and made it really easy to bring the debate together. So thank you very much and agreeing to participate. Finally, thanks to all the audience for turning up and engaging with us, and I hope it's been useful to you, and I hope it's something you can go away and sort of take forward and think about. In front of you, there are some ballot papers which have been lingering there. Now, what would be great for us is at the end of the debate, we've got some black boxes. If you could take the party you think you would vote for, just based on energy. We want to take all the other politics out. We're not interested in your party allegiances. We're just interested in how you think the parties perform on their energy policy. And that'd be really interesting, and we'll get the results out probably by Twitter and email over the next week or so. So, thank you very much. Thanks, John.